All right, we are joined by Connor, who was voted out of Australian Stranded in 14th place.
I was 15th.
No, 15th.
15th, yeah.
Just to give everyone context, we have just merged last night. Tonight will be the first merge boot. But we're here to talk about Connor on his thoughts on the season, how he thought he did, and everything else. So welcome, Connor.
Oh, thank you, Poods.
Better known to most Stranded people as Danny. I guess we kind of went over a little bit the last time we spoke while you were still in the game, but I guess let's start with what went wrong.
I don't think there was too much that I did wrong. I think my biggest issue was not kind of forcing Phoebe to do my bidding a little bit more. Ultimately, the reason I got voted out, at least in my opinion, was I allowed Peter and Phoebe to talk me into voting out Dan the night that we wound up not having a tribal council. And as soon as Dan got the feeling that he was potentially a target, he then went to Brooke and Monica and Fenella, but not really Fenella, went to the Larakai girls on our tribe, figured out that, things were going to flip on him. And then out of myself, Phoebe, and Peter, they chose me as the potential backup target, or who Dan was targeting at that point, or I guess in this case, who Zach was targeting. So I think that was objectively where things went wrong, was that decision. However, I think it went a little further than that. I think I had sort of the same issue with Phoebe when it came down to voting AK versus Shawnee, where both times in the swaps, Phoebe kind of became instantly drawn to the newer people. When we went to Tallulah, she became more invested in AK and Rowan. And then when we went to Dejaru 3.0, she became more invested in Brooke and in Monica and in Fenella. And because I had kind of ditched Shawnee when that ship was going down and kind of latched myself onto Phoebe, I kind of felt like I needed to navigate the game with her. And because I didn't push her to stick with me and to go with Zach and Peter and kind of, just stay safe with numbers, I kind of got caught playing the middle, and that's kind of where I got fucked. So
it's interesting because for me, I thought it was your connection to Shawnee that kind of alienated you from everyone else, considering she was a pretty controversial character when she left.
Yeah, I think that there was that, but I also think that everybody understood that, I was close with Shawnee, but I still had a good relationship with Rowan. I had a good relationship with AK, had a good relationship with Phoebe, which is why, when we went to that tribal council with 5 of us left at Tallulah, it wasn't ever, should we target Connor? It was, should we target Shawnee? Should we target AK? Myself and Rowan and Phoebe weren't ever really considered as targets by anyone. I think that everyone had kind of figured that group of Tallulah would be a good group to get back together with later on in the game if we could manage it. And Shawnee was kind of more of the wild card, huge personality, and there was no way Rowan was going to let go of AK. So it really came down to Phoebe. And, from what I understand in my conversations with her, she would have voted out Shawnee as soon as we as soon as we swapped to that tribe. I think Phoebe was ready to make a move against Dejaru's. So
well, you spoke a little bit about Phoebe's obsession with the rankings coming in 9th and having a bitter taste towards Dejaru because of that. Do you think that ranking played a huge part in the season?
I don't think it would have played as big of a role if it wasn't immediately before we swapped. I think what kind of screwed our swap tribe over more than, say, Dejaru 2.0 or Larakai 2.0, is that Phoebe went into that swap tribe knowing that she wasn't really closely aligned with any of the other people that she swapped over with. I believe the only reason she voted with us at that first tribal is that Rowan and AK were willing to cut Abby in order to make inroads in the tribe. I think at that flip, Phoebe really felt like she had nobody. So she was like, screw it, I'll go over and vote with Tallulah, like the new Larakai people on Tallulah, and take out somebody that ranked me low. I don't think it was anything to do with like the ranking tribe. I don't think it plays like a huge role in the season. I just think specifically with Phoebe, that challenge really resonated with her and kind of put her mind on a path where she's not looking to work with people from her original tribe exclusively, which was never my plan either. But I think I was much more open to working with people from my original tribe than Phoebe was for the long haul.
You went to more tribal councils than a majority of the players in the game. I mean, maybe more than anyone. You and Phoebe.
I think Rowan went to a lot too, because he went to the first two and then all three with us. And I think I went to 5 total. So
okay. Yeah, so he's probably at like 6, and then now he's in the merge. So
yeah. But I mean, I went to 5 out of 10 rounds. So half of my nights I went to tribal.
If you could have made it to the merge, do you think you would have gone deep?
You know, I'd like to say that I would. I think I've had positioned myself pretty well that if we hadn't gone to that tribal and hadn't had that full scramble time before Luke went home, or if I was even just able to rein in Phoebe and Peter for that scramble time, I think I would have been set up really, really well going into a merge. I think that my relationship with Phoebe was solid. I think I was making good inroads with Peter. Zach, I had a good relationship with him until he realized that I was going to flip over with Phoebe and Peter. And then I think it was just no matter what happened, I was screwed. But my goal was I wanted to be able to vote with Monica and Fenella and Brooke so that if we did make it to a merge with that group that we had been working on Jaru, we would be able to meet up with, you know, Rowan and AK, and then whichever stragglers were in that new Larakai tribe to be able to kind of, you know, make an alliance where, you know, we have Brooke, who's a massive target. We have Shane and Jackie, who are making themselves massive targets on the other side. And then I'm pretty well connected within there. And if we could get back together with that Tallulah group, you know, having a solid 4 in there would be very dangerous at the merge. That was my ultimate goal. But, you know, it could also be a bunch of people blowing smoke up my ass. And I was just a little big headed thinking that I would be well positioned. So
what have you learned since being voted off? Because now obviously you can see everything, see who everyone was. What was some of the most surprising things game wise, not so much rep wise, although we'll talk about that later?
I haven't gone through too much of the Larakai stuff yet. I kind of just went through the tribes that I was a part of. I think the biggest surprise for me was Chrissy, Monica. I think that reading through some of the stuff that she was doing and realizing how big of a role she was playing in a tribe where I thought Brooke was kind of just running things. I think that was the biggest surprise for me because I thought that Monica was going to be somebody that I'd be able to work with easily and was probably just going to try and make merge before she really started doing anything serious. But it looked like she was playing hard. That shocked me. The rest was pretty straightforward. I realized that Phoebe was never really as committed to me as I thought she was. I think she's somebody that was also just playing to make merge before she really wanted to commit to anything, despite the theatrics after I left. But
did you feel, I mean, she's acting closer to you than I thought she was.
You know, I think part of it is also.
Did you feel like super close?
You know, I liked her a lot. Phoebe wasn't the person that I wanted sitting at the end with me. She's somebody that would be expendable. I think that she was a good ally to have because once you get her to open up with you and once she felt trusted, she told me a lot. Except apparently I learned that she did hear my name. So when I was asking her if my name was out there, she was lying to me. So that's a little annoying. But no, you know, she was good. She wasn't somebody that I was like, oh man, I need to be with Phoebe at the end. Like she's my ride or die. She was kind of my ride or die by like necessity, as in the only person that swapped with me onto Jaru that I had been on a tribe with for the last week. So by necessity, we were obviously going to be a little bit closer because we had been working together and wound up on the same tribe. But she wasn't the person that I had like envisioned myself playing the game with.
So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about reps, because you figured out about halfway through the season that, oh, this is like a lot of vets.
Yes.
Whereas you probably thought it was like mostly new players initially.
Yeah, when I first started, I definitely thought I knew there would be other people. I didn't know how many. I figured like, like I knew Steph would be in it for sure. Like that sounds cocky, but after she dropped out of Isolated, I figured she would be back for whatever the next thing was. So I figured she would be in there somewhere. I knew that there would probably be like a couple people from the most recent season of Isolated. It wasn't until we swapped and AK started talking to me and I was like, oh, fuck, that's Casey. And then I was just thinking about everybody because I had some suspicion with Shane. I was convinced Shane was Kimmy for the longest time. I figured that, you probably had some older people in there as well. I was under the impression that it was like half and half. That was my going into the swap. It's like, oh, it's half and half. It's probably like a fans versus favorite season, but like a new series kind of thing. But then I met Casey and I was like, oh, I had already been kind of pegging on the other side, like who I thought were returning players, who wasn't. And then when Casey started talking, I was like, okay, this is much bigger than I expected.
Did that make it scarier for you, harder for you to navigate, or just the same?
It was kind of just a thing where I was like, oh, okay, it explains why people were, for me, it was more like making me more comfortable with the fact that I felt so uncomfortable, if that makes sense. Like when I played in Turks, we hit the merge and I never felt unsafe before the merge. There are a couple tribals that I went to where I was like, some people could not be voting with me, but I felt solid in everything I did. And it was because, we had a bunch of people that were new to playing these games. We had people that were just, they were really looking to solidify a group and work with that group as long as they could. Whereas in this game, just in the first week when I didn't even go to tribal, you could see everybody jockeying for position. That's why our tribe was such a mess. And once it clicked for me that everyone was a returning player, it made me realize why I felt the way I did, why I was so uncomfortable, but also made me a little less stressed about not doing well, because I was like, okay, it's an all-star season. People are here to play. It's not
you're not going to get home.
Right. It's not that I'm going to be losing to somebody who this is their first time playing. If I go home, it's either going to be that I massively fucked up or somebody played it really well, Yeah.
It's interesting. I didn't think of it that way. I would have thought maybe playing with All-Stars would make it a little bit scarier.
I mean, it's more daunting. And I think that's why every tribal, I'm stressed when I go to tribals or any sort of voting thing in general. It's the most nerve-wracking thing for me. But I think knowing that you're going in with people who have played before makes it less about how well am I doing, and more about who in this tribe is running it. You know what I mean? Right. That everybody's thinking about it from a smart perspective for the most part. And so, that if you get outplayed and you go home, it's because somebody did something good. It's not because you totally fucked up, although that is the case for some people. I just think that it makes it more exciting, but also a lot harder. So
you expressed how exhausted you were, I think even after the first week. And you've done a lot of these podcasts with me. I'm sure you've heard me talk about all-star seasons. Now that you've experienced one in a way, of course, there were no personal biases in this particular one because of the alias factor.
Yeah, there were still some personal biases.
At least on the surface. I'm going to ask you about that too. But how would you describe this season to someone who did not experience it?
I think you were right. You had told me when we had talked previously that in an all-star season, people it sucks up so much of your time because there's so much to consider. There's so many people and so many different plans, and you just really need to commit yourself and, really dedicate yourself to the game if you want to make it far. And I think that was 100% on the nose. I think, you could see it with a couple people that just weren't showing up as often or not putting in as much work. They're either a Fenella and they're just getting dragged along by Brooke, or there were a couple people in the beginning that, were probably doing fine if they were in a newbie season, logging in a couple times a day just to see what's up and chatting. But the amount of activity in this season was just overwhelming that if you wanted to keep up and be competitive in any sort of way, you needed to be fully committed and really putting your all into it. So
yeah, it's interesting. I remember in your season, you were one of the biggest personalities. And I think in this one, and we saw it a little bit with Chelsea too, you kind of fell into the background with some people the Dans. Now we'll refer to them, not the Australian names. Zach, Brooke, even some that
Shawnee.
Yeah, Shawnee for sure. Even
Flick.
some that I didn't expect. Flick, Phoebe was kind of a big personality, which I didn't expect. How did your strategy change? Was it a conscious decision to kind of remain a little bit low key, or did that just happen naturally, or both?
I think it wasn't necessarily like intentionally being low key, but I was really trying not to overplay my hand at all. I think, my big strategy is I'm trying to be as aligned and as committed in relationships as I can be to as many people. And that's a really easy way to get yourself caught and voted out. As we could see from how I got voted out. But, I think by not trying to be the biggest personality on the boards, it allows you to be a little more under the radar in the beginning. And then your relationships come and pay off later in the game, which is what my ideal situation would have been. The problem is in a season like this is, you've got these massive personalities like Zach and Brooke, Shawnee, who I think that was another thing is, I tried to align myself closely with somebody who's a big personality that was going to take a lot of the heat if we ever wound up in like a bad situation. And I think allowing myself to kind of play a sidekick role, at least in the beginning, as we kind of figured out our spot, it wasn't intentionally where I wanted to be. I think I wanted to be a little more in control than I was, but I let somebody else take you saw Shawnee fighting about the rules and everything. Like having her there allowed me to be a little more in the background, despite still being around and still talking to as many people as I could for as long as I could and make those relationships.
So let's talk about the biases then, because you brought it up. Obviously, you were on a tribe with Rohan, who was Wok, who you are very close friends with outside of the season. And at one point, you realized it was Wok. How did that impact your strategy?
I'd like to say that it didn't impact my strategy. And for the most part, it didn't. It definitely made that first tribal in Tallulah a lot more clear to me. I knew every single person on that tribe except for Phoebe outside of this game. I've either hosted them, played games with them,
Who did you recognize? All of them?
So I recognized Casey. I recognized Pia. I recognized Wok, but it took me a while to place him because as soon as we swapped into the same tribe, he's like, "Oh, I'm 30 years old. I work in finance in New York City." But he was posting literally and being the exact same character he was when he was Joaquin, like using some of the same phrases, like constantly being like, "Oh, I'm drinking. I'll be back later." I'm like, "Okay, well, there's Joaquin." And I had figured he was in the game because he wasn't hosting. So that's a little bit of the meta game for me was I was looking at who wasn't hosting so I could figure out who was in the game. But, for me, really all it did was we swapped into that new tribe and I knew that the other three people were Steph, Casey, and Joaquin. I was like, all right, so obviously I want one of those people gone in this first round. And it's still, final 21. And this is the thing that Shawnee and I had talked about is, it's final 21. It's not time to be taking out somebody huge. In my opinion, you want as many big players around with you as you can get going into that later stage of the pre-merge and then into the merge, because you want people that are going to be able to work with you, figure out good ways to move forward, but you also want people that will be a target ahead of you. And I figured that Rowan was probably a good person to have around because not only is he good at these games and somebody that I definitely thought I could rely on up to a certain point, but he's, a big enough personality and threatening enough that if, we got into a bad situation, there's potential that he might get taken out before me. So I didn't want to get him out. And obviously Casey was kind of his right-hand man. AK was his right-hand man. And so then it came down to Steph and, I love Steph, but I've watched her play before and I know that she's loyal to a point, but not really, unless you really, really work on it. And so I was like, okay, like I'm cool getting rid of her. That definitely informed my opinions on them. But at the same time, like I've played games with Rob before, who was Pia, and I pretty much spent the entire first week of the game throwing Pia under the bus. So,
yeah.
Personal biases aside, I wasn't necessarily too worried about that.
Is there anything else in the game that you want to clarify or talk about? Because I'd like to move on to the future of the season without you, fortunately.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I don't really have much more to talk about. I think that kind of covers everything that I did. So, okay.
Well, now that you're out and you see the landscape and who all's playing whom, how do you feel about the season? First of all, how do you feel about what you've seen so far, outside of just your experiences? And What are you looking forward to?
I was surprised by how many people you got that weren't like very new alumni, like how many of the old school you got to come back. I thought that was really cool. And I'm also surprised at how well a lot of them are playing. Like, this sounds really naive, but like, you know, the game, at least even from talking to people who played in like Indonesia and like the seasons before you put the instant messenger on, like talking to them, the game is very different, even just from when they used to have to communicate just by PM instead of IM. Like, playing with the IM system is very different. So it's cool to see like how many of those people have come back from, you know, a couple of years off and they just hop right back in and they're playing really well. So I like that. I was shocked by how many of the people who were the first boots were people who played recently. Because you would think that, you know, after only a couple months off, some people would be able to hop right back in and do well. I'm very surprised with some of the people who are playing really well. And I'm also really surprised by some people that are kind of fucking themselves over. For instance, like I said, Chrissy is playing a lot harder and a lot better than I would expect after playing with her in a previous season.
Well, I think she was underrated.
I mean, she's always been well, but she was always a bottom feeder though in our season. I think that's the difference is like when I played with Chrissy, she swapped in as a vet into a tribe where she was in the minority and was kind of playing from the bottom. And then she swapped to another tribe where she was playing for the bottom. And then when she swapped into the merge, she was kind of with me where she was kind of trying to play the middle. And then we got blindsided on the first vote. And then from there, the two of us were working together. So I think it's one of those things where I think seeing her play from a different position is interesting. And it's a lot different of a game than I've seen her play before.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think some people have taken to it tremendously. Like Flick was a good example of someone who really loved the instant messaging system and has done a lot better in this season than she has in previous seasons, although she was highly entertaining in every time she's played. Whereas I think someone like Jackie, who's really old school, prefers like leaving very long, detailed messages. And I don't think she's doing as well with this new chat system. Certainly she's coming across a little bit colder than she has in previous runs. She kind of was a motherly, extremely social player in her previous runs. And this time I think she's coming across a little bit negatively.
Yeah. Well, that was Candace, right?
Yes.
On the list?
Yes.
Okay.
And Candace was like a favorite.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was going to say I loved talking with her, but you could tell like that was one of my tells early that you had some old school people is because she would be online for like an hour and she'd send you like a couple paragraphs in an IM instead of just like short, sweet sentences outlining what she wanted to do. But I mean, it's working for her at the moment. So
yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer that she's one of our best strategists and social players. So, I mean, I would assume she'd do well in every scenario, regardless of the limitations or whatever. But I don't know. It's not the same, though. It's not like she's this... Usually when she plays, she is orchestrating all of the votes, and maybe to a degree, but it's certainly not like she's the outlier where she normally is.
Right.
To that point, I think Shane has adapted very well to the IM system. And
yes,
I mean, she was always funny and always good, but I mean, really good in this. And I think even Ziggy has identified her as, well, as he refers to it, the other big threat. In other words, he thinks it's only him and her.
Oh, God.
Which is extremely incorrect. And I think he's going to be surprised if he continues to think that way. But I do think Ziggy's pretty smart, as we've seen. I didn't give him as much credit as I probably should have. So I'll be interested to see how he does. I think he's late.
Same.
I think he's late season for sure. I think maybe he gets taken out before the final, maybe in like a final five situation. That's kind of where
based on the confessionals that I read, I think that the finals are going to have quite a few people from that alliance in Larakai that just voted out Flick. I think that that's probably going to be a big group to reckon with. That like Rowan, Lee, Ziggy, well, Moana. I think that those three are kind of going to run things. And their biggest issue is going to be controlling AK and then trying to pull in people like Phoebe, who I think they have a good chance of getting.
I think Ziggy is very used to playing a big trust game with an alliance of people and forming these bonds and just selecting who he doesn't want to continue with. I don't know if that's going to necessarily work with this group, because I don't see a group like this splintering up and just taking it lying down. I think for sure once one of those big alliances comes into power, then I think people will start to fracture. At least that's the hope. That's what I think.
It's always the hope.
Yeah, I mean,
just one alliance doesn't dominate.
It's what we want, but I also think it's what will happen just based on a lot of these people's history.
Right. And I think it's also the difference between playing a game like they did in Morocco, where it's a lot of people playing a Survivor game for the first time, or for the first time in a long time, especially one like Stranded, versus an all-star season where you have a lot of people coming back, and they're probably, you don't want to say they're all like the cream of the crop of the season, but it's people who have made it far enough that like, they know what to look for. They're going to be able to fish out who's really making the calls, who's setting up moves. I think that that's going to be an issue for a lot of these people. I think a lot of them think that they're the only big threat, or that they're the only ones really playing. I guess we'll see.
I mean, Ziggy's kind of like, he's frustrating to watch, at least in his season. He's been fun to watch so far in this one, but he's also someone that I'm fascinated by. Like, you can't keep your eyes off of what he's going to do, because just the way he plays is so foreign to me.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And he's chosen his allies very oddly. Like, he's got Benji, who I'd say is probably his closest right now. But I can kind of see Benji being a little bit of a wild card. And certainly, I can't see Rohan just following him into the abyss,
No, and Rowan's too well connected outside of that group to have that happen, in my opinion.
Well, it's going to be, a matter of, does Rohan realize that before he's on Moana's pecking
bad side? Right.
Because that's how she does, which is very effective. She lulls people into thinking she's with them and then cuts them before they get the chance to understand it,
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how that works in this season, because some of these people are very shrewd. And like you said, they're not first-time players. The way Ziggy played with new players, he didn't get a whole lot of credit because he was a veteran amongst new players and kind of ran the table. And also, I think Gabby got a little bit of that kudos that he got.
Right.
And there was some bitterness in play. So this is really like, this is all him. So he can take credit for it. He can also take the fall.
Takes the fall for it when it doesn't work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And these are really good people. So in some sense, if he does well here, he has serious street cred. Whereas if he fails, it's probably not as big of a deal like you mentioned before. But also, I think that a little bit of that's riding on the line for him.
I don't know. I mean, how much I loathe to say anything good about Ziggy, because it's just going to make his head explode. But, he obviously has a good head for Survivor strategy and for these kinds of games and how to play it. I think it will be really interesting to see how he plays if he doesn't have a right hand like Gabby, who's doing damage control and also doing their own work to support his game.
Yeah, and
so for me,
he's evolved too. Like, he's obviously played a lot since then, and he's gotten better. Other people, it's interesting because we had 5 winners in this cast, and so far I think we have 4 left. Is that right?
I believe so. You still have Russell, you have Ziggy, you have
Val,
and then who is playing? There was one more because Melinda's out already.
Lee was Tammy.
Lee, right, and that one fascinates me actually, because apparently I'm Lee's biggest ally, or one of them. That's what he was saying in his confession where I got voted out. But that one was fascinating to me because I thought that Lee was just kind of like half-assing, not really trying what we were playing. Like, would be on for like maybe 10 minutes just to chat here and there. And we had some good things set up, but I thought that he was going to be more like, like a Davey or a Pat or someone like that who's there for the challenges, there for tribals, wasn't really doing anything. But after reading through some stuff since we swapped away from each other, realized that he's actually playing much harder than I gave him credit for.
That's part of why he's so effective. You're not seeing that coming. And really, it was so interesting when he was on the tribe with Shane, Moana, and Lee, because Moana tried to pull off a blindside by giving his idol to Benji, assuming Benji was going to get the vote, and then it shifted to Jenna Louise. And he was previously the closest to Lee, Moana and Lee. But Lee kind of went rogue and was like, I'm not feeling this. And I don't think Ziggy's experienced that too often, because he said, I instantly lost a lot of trust in Lee. He didn't understand why Lee didn't just follow him along in his plan to blindside Shane, I think is who they were going for. And it was interesting seeing Shane's understanding of what happened and how quickly she was able to grasp, like, okay, Moana's the one who kind of set this up, and I will give a lot of credit to Flick, who sussed that out too. So it'll be interesting. I think we could be seeing a battle of the winners as we go into the final stretch of this thing.
That actually wouldn't surprise me if they were kind of like the big players left at the end, because none of them really stand out right now as like a huge personality, which is kind of fitting for how most of them won, from what I understand. But in this case, the fact that 4 of them were on the same tribe going into the merge, like set up really well for a good showdown.
So that'll be exciting. Obviously, I'm looking forward to like Brooke, Zach, I think, and AK. But I think as those big personalities come head to head, I think one of them will make it as a shield. I just don't know which one someone's going to latch on to.
I think it totally depends on whether or not AK starts ruining people's games, because he's a little bit of a wild card and runs his mouth a little bit too much. Right. And I think, Rowan's using him really well.
Yeah.
But
Rohan has sussed out that he doesn't trust AK. He's kind of like, he's off from the deep end.
Yeah.
Which was shocking to me. I didn't think he had fingered that just yet. I figured he would. No,
I definitely agree with you. I think that at least one of them is going to make it deep. I think these first couple votes, I think Brooke and Zach are in deep shit right now after the last couple days on Dejaru. I think that those two are going to have the hardest time out of that group making it far. I think AK stands the best chance of making it deep, but it really just depends on how long his allies are willing to put up with his bullshit. So
Zach is so interesting too. He's much better than people give him credit for just because he's so out there, but he's actually pretty clued in to what's really going on.
Yeah.
And he's pretty good about getting what he wants out of people. And like Shane absolutely had no idea how to handle him.
Apparently I didn't either. So
yeah. And I think that catches people off guard because they're just assuming, oh, this is an idiot who's making an ass out of himself just to have a good time. But they don't realize like he's pretty effective at it.
Pretty perceptive. Yeah.
That too. And I think he can really fuck up some people's games if they give him that opportunity. So like I think someone like Moana might be thinking, oh, I gotta keep this guy around. He's going to be an easy shield for me. I don't think that's a safe bet. I think having Zach as a shield is a death sentence. Way worse than Brooke, to be honest.
Yep. I agree there.
Because at least Brooke is probably just going to vote the same way every time. You can't guarantee that with Zach,
Mm-hmm.
Lastly, I'll talk about Peter because we haven't yet. I'm pleasantly surprised by Peter because
he's so much more fun than he was in Isolated.
Well, and he was fun in Stranded too. It just really depends on the season. Like sometimes he's under the radar winner status, or sometimes he's like crazy, chaotic, over the top. And it looks like we're getting that version, which I'm very happy for. So that's one. I think he might go tonight, unfortunately. But if he can win immunity, or I will be throwing a public idol at the beginning of council tonight.
Yes.
That no one knows about. So we'll see what happens with that. And the main reason I'm doing that is because I haven't had a season with a public idol and an idol nullifier, and we're about to get both.
That's incredible.
So we'll see, because I'd love to see someone trying to bluff an idol play when there's a idol nullifier out there,
Right. No, that'll be fun. Yeah, I think if Peter can survive like this initial merge vote, I think that he stands a good chance to make it a couple more. I don't see him winning the season. I think he's kind of gotten
I think
caught.
He'll be like the early cockroach that will go like third merge boot.
I mean, I hope he does well. I like him. Out of all the winners, I think that he would be the most fun to see win, only because he's the most out there right now. But he's good at these games. I don't think anyone should underestimate him. He just needs to
that's the thing, man.
Find a way to survive the target coming off of that last
All
try.
these people left are big personalities, but they're also incredibly good players. Like it's actually mind-boggling how little dead space we have in this group outside of Fenella, but I think everyone's sussed that already. And I think the smart people are already thinking, ain't no way anybody's taking out Fenella before me. So it'll be interesting to see how people deal with that. I think Rohan has already planted that seed. I think Zach has planted that seed. I could see Fenella going in a very specific situation where nobody really knows what's happening. And it's just like a safe. All right, we can all agree.
Right, like everyone's like, she needs to leave.
No one really cares about Fenella. So that's the easy boot. I could see that happening. Outside of that,
she's the only person that I see in this merge that's exclusively kind of like at GOAT status. I think there's a couple other ones that are kind of riding the line. Like I think if Phoebe gets picked up by somebody and just kind of latches on, I think she could easily fade into that territory. But for now, I think she's kind of feisty enough that she might avoid it.
Rourke didn't get a full season experience because she was kind of dropped in at the merge, which is highly unusual.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like her first full Stranded season, and it's clear that she's not at the same level as a lot of these players. And I love Rourke, and I also know she's going through some personal shit that's caused her activity level to drop, but I don't think she's at the level as anyone else. in this cast. And I think there's a chance she shows up, but if she does, I think it's mostly going to be a foil to a good player versus her pulling off a good move.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see what happens. I'm
rooting for her.
Hopefully she has a good time.
I would love nothing more than, her to end up final 6 and go batshit crazy to try to get a win. I think that would be hilarious, but
there would be nothing funnier to me than to have somebody who was considered like an obvious GOAT, like show up near the end and just dominate to the point where nobody can deny that they like deserve to win.
What will really suck though is if it's like a vote for the worst scenario where, maybe
like what happened when Davey almost won Morocco.
Exactly. And usually that doesn't happen necessarily, but these people are really over the top personalities, and I do not put it past them for that to happen.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I also think most of these people want a good ending too. So I think that's pretty much it. I'm excited. I could continue to talk about each of the people that I keep seeing on my list in depth.
I mean, we've got plenty of time, and I now have free time. So if you want to talk about it later, I'm happy to hop in and talk with you. So
yeah. And now that the merge has happened, I'm tonight going to instate you as an admin, as Danny, not as Connor, because I trust you to remain impartial and help me host the season. So I'll definitely probably get you in on the podcast too, just to help out.
Yeah, no worries.
But I'm definitely looking forward to tonight. I think tonight Peter might go, but I also think he might win the challenge. I haven't checked yet.
I hope he wins just for chaos.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. Well, I'll check in next time. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, Poody.
All right.
Have a good night.
Bye.